Welcome to Athletes OnBalance, where we talk to athletes, coaches, and experts about mental health and sports. This is a stigma-free zone for inner thoughts and outer conversations. We're helping athletes and anyone with mental health challenges perform at their best, on and off the field.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Athletes OnBalance. I'm your host, Walt Norley, the founder and CEO of OnBalance Health. Today, I am excited to be joined by Mark and Kym Hilinski, the founders of Hilinski's Hope Foundation. Some background for followers who are not aware. Mark and Kym founded Hilinski's Hope in 2018 to honor the memory of their son, Tyler. We'll talk more about that. The foundation's mission is to promote mental health awareness and education for student athletes. Hilinski's Hope has been instrumental in breaking the stigma around mental illness in athletics and providing essential resources and support for mental well-being. Mark and Kym, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm delighted and honored to have you both join Athletes OnBalance.
Thanks, Walt.
Let's talk a little bit about the foundation of this. Clearly, the inspiration was Tyler. But again, for our followers who aren't as aware of Tyler, what happened with Tyler and how this was created. Can you share a little bit about Tyler's background and the Tyler story that led to Hilinski's Hope?
Sure. Tyler was a collegiate athlete, right? He was a quarterback at Washington State University, in the middle of our three sons. All of them played football. All of them played quarterback. And we had no idea that Tyler was struggling. He didn't reach out for help. He didn't share with anybody that he was having these suicidal thoughts. We were on a vacation after the bowl game in December 28th, which is my birthday, 2017. We all went on a vacation to Cabo, Mexico for about a week. Everybody flew back. Our youngest one, Ryan, flew back with us to California. Our older son, Kelly, went to his school in Utah. And then Tyler flew up to Washington State in Pullman. About 7 days later, he was gone. And we had no idea that he was suffering. We didn't realize that there was something going on with his mental health. And so we lost him to suicide January 16th, 2018. And we realized that if Tyler was struggling, this wonderful kid, you would have loved him, Walt. Loved by people, adored by his coaches, his teammates, his friends. If he was struggling and suffering in silence, how many other Tylers out there are struggling and afraid to reach out and ask for help because of the stigma, or they really don't know how to reach out for help because they don't have the language, right? So we started Hilinski's Hope just a couple of months after Tyler passed. And the mission really is to raise awareness, beat down that stigma, which runs so strong for our collegiate athletes, all our elite athletes. And we have created mental health resources through our researchers at UNC Greensboro. So it's been almost 6.5 years. And, we said early on, if we found out that, and I'll tell you, Coach Leach didn't think Tyler took his life. He thought he was at the bottom of the roster of anybody on his team that would take their life. But we thought, even if we found out now, today, that's not how Tyler died, by his own hands, we continue to do the work that we are doing because we have learned and seen so much in the 6 years or so. There's just so many athletes out there, so many students struggling with their mental health, and we're just going to keep on working.
Let me thread a little bit off that, Kym, if you don't mind. There were no signs, right? And, I did see your Today piece with some of the other families that went through a similar tragedy. And if I recall, most of them had the same commentary, that there were not a lot of, or any outward signs. And maybe in some cases there were, but for the most part. And I've heard this before. I've gone through my own journey. I do know about trying to put on a face and, keep people away for all the reasons you just mentioned. It's the stigma and not looking at yourself that way. Don't want anybody else to look at you that way. It's 2020 goggles when I say this, but because we're going to go forward on this, but you look at the resources that that these universities have now within the athletic department. Because of these situations and people just getting smarter, both on the tragedy front because of awareness, as well as, getting kids back into competition sooner if they're going through a struggle, which is part of the business of that world. If those resources were there, do you have any sense that signs would have been picked up, or still outwardly he was so strong and showing no signs it would not make a difference?
It's a great question, and I'm not sure I know the answer exactly, but this if we pick up from the day Tyler passed, a lot of the information that we got about him from the coaches, from the players, from other teammates, or students at school, it was pretty clear they had an impression of Tyler that he was very happy. He was the guy. In fact, the stories that they would tell us didn't make a lot of sense to us at first, and we pressed him on it. And I'll give you one example. One, they would talk about him. He was the bright light in the room. He'd come in and everybody was excited to see him and stuff. And we know Tyler to be much more reserved than that. He was the B-type personality. Our other two are A's, and if they had a bad date or a bad pass or a bad class, you'd know it. Same for good. Tyler, throw a pick, throw a touchdown, you couldn't always tell. So he's just built sort of differently. And so when we heard this, it started sounding like, the light was on him and he was this rock star that walked in, and we knew that wasn't the case. So as we pushed a little deeper, what we started hearing was his teammates would say things like, my aunt had surgery, I don't know, 3 months ago. I kind of forgot myself. And Tyler would pop up, in the weight room and go, "Hey, John, how's your aunt doing?" Sort of out of left field when they'd go, and they didn't do a lot of big parties necessarily, but they have little events that they go to as a team at the hospital and as they travel together. And when we pressed them on it, they would always give us the same thing. And what started to sound familiar to us was Tyler was always asking about you, because he never had to talk about himself, right? So I don't know if that's a breadcrumb. I don't know if that's a clue. And we say for time, usually we don't have a lot of time when we're having these discussions and talks, and we so appreciate being on the show today, because the reality is there's always clues, right? There's signs that we didn't see. And the biggest one, Tyler, at some point, and the details may or may not matter on this, Walt, but he was the backup for 3 years. Backup quarterback, Luke Falk, threw for 10,000 yards, good kid, good athlete. And so he was in that role. As that year wound out, his very first start was that bowl game against Michigan State that they lost. And so he had 2 years of eligibility. He had scouts that had graded him out as somebody to look for. He had all of those things that you would check box. Hey, he had a girlfriend. He had a car that worked. He was doing okay in school, enjoyed his team, and loved his coaches, respected all those guys. So outwardly, there were no signs in that regard. We don't have a history of mental health issues in our family that we're aware of. So we just didn't have that background either. We were constantly worried about their physical health, necks and backs and knees, right, and all that stuff. But what changed, Walt, towards the end, a couple of months before he died, at 6 weeks anyway, when he found out he was going to be starting, his texts were just a little bit shorter. The commentary, the quality or the content was slightly different. So much so that, around the beginning of December, I went to Kym and said, something's up with Tyler. He's never like this. I know, but he's starting this time and he's got a lot of stuff, a lot of press, things to do. So he's busy. Totally makes sense. And we tell this story before, in these Tyler talks. I won't spend the whole time on it here, but as a teenager, he had no problem telling us, hey, I need help right now, or whatever, not mental health help, but just help of any kind. And so we had this vision and thoughts of Tyler being very able to have difficult conversations, talk to people, smarter than him, guys that were in and out of football. And so we worked with that assumption. And when we saw that he was pulling away, it was a natural thing to sort of say, okay, well, he's super busy. Fast forward to the last week when Kym mentioned we were on vacation, it was just us, just the boys, no girlfriends, no teammates, nothing, just us in a little place in Mexico. And he was down, he took losses really hard. He took them very personally. But it wasn't unusually so, right? He'd go hang out with his brothers by the pool. They'd get some food. He'd go back. He'd said a couple times to me, Dad, that was just embarrassing. And, I don't know what it was, 20-40. It was a competitive game, but in his mind, it was embarrassing. So I think we've been saying it for so long that we don't see any signs. And I think it probably should be modified a little bit. We didn't see any signs that we understood to be, that mental health related or struggling related at all. He was getting tired, or he was getting overwhelmed with other things, but it wasn't unlike Tyler to be able to manage that. So I'll pause there, but I think in our world, the way we get it, it's one child. He's our best guy. We tell everybody we love all of our kids, but we really like Tyler. He was great. So.
Well, it's an interesting, and again, for our followers, this is also the same young man star who got carried off by his teammates after the winning touchdown against, I think it was Boise State.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, so he had a lot of highs, from an athletic perspective, and there sounds like there weren't circumstantial issues, environmental issues, right? The girlfriend, the keeping up with his academics, playing ball at a very high level. But, it does lend to, which we're going to get into, what you're doing, because we know there are others out there that are not showing signs. They don't have the but you're educating people. When you put it out there and you create awareness, what does that do for a Tyler-like person who's hiding something underneath that perhaps through your program and the educational elements of it, they get essentially the bravery or the courage to go have a conversation with somebody. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume that's a big part of what you're doing out there.
That's exactly right. We say it takes strength to reach out and ask for help.
It shouldn't have to,
Right.
but it seems
it does, especially because of student athletes.
I didn't answer your question, Walt. When Tyler died, Washington State had no mental health resources on campus, period.
Right.
There was a guy, in fact, we were told, from a girlfriend that sort of, Tyler mentioned something. He was having some dark thoughts here at the last 10 days or so. And she said, you got to talk to your parents, oh yeah, I'm talking to them. And this guy named Jerry, so we'd never met Jerry. He ended up being a guy on the team that organized the buses and the hotels. And, he was on the football staff, but he wasn't a mental health counselor of any kind.
Right.
And so as we evaluated Tyler's passing at Washington State, we put a lot of burden on the system there. They had no resource. So should he have raised his hand? Should he have had some family like the Hilinskis come in and talk about suicide and mental health? Yours from a bigger, how do we attack this? Once you do say, I'm struggling, what can I do to help myself? That wasn't there. I don't think that was the only reason, of course. I just think it was additive to the fact that he wasn't exposed to it, even at that level, didn't know where he could, possibly get help within the school.
And I'll tell you what, we've been on so many campuses across the country where Alabama, right? They have 10 mental health professionals just for football. And
Right.
we've been on other campuses, in Montana, where they have one for the entire student body, you know, a mental health professional. So it varies from campus to campus. What we're trying to do, we decided to do something different, is share journey through the lens of a parent, right, who has lost a child. And we share our Tyler talks because we don't want to lose another Tyler. We think there's someone there listening that's a lot like Tyler, maybe not that day, but maybe a month from now or a year from now. And, you know, they'll listen and maybe use Tyler's story to reach out and ask for help.
So you have a couple things there that I pick up. One is that, you know, in 2018 the resources weren't there. You know, better or worse, the awareness wasn't there. It was probably very, 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 very unusual when something like this tragically happened, and we know that since then it's occurred more. But you didn't have the resources, so you look at starting your foundation. So in a lot of ways, you know, you created an impetus for people to start putting resources together at the athletic department level. Because I understand what you're saying about, I mean, just look at the ratio. If you have counselors for the whole student body, look at that counselor to student ratio. I mean, that in itself is kind of ridiculous, right? And you go to Alabama, and as you probably know, we've worked extensively with Dr. Gilmore, Ginger Gilmore, and that team down there, and they've got an incredible process, right? And now you see, and you guys are seeing it even on a bigger scale than I have, because I'm pretty new at this. They're starting to come together. There's more Alabamas, but so you, in a lot of ways, I'm going to give you credit. You help create essentially an industry or an element of care that is as essential as the orthopods and the trainers taking care of the knees, backs, and shoulders, right? They go hand in hand. So within some of these initiatives, and you have numerous initiatives, can you share a little bit about, you know, maybe for instance, the game plan program and what the purpose and the goal is there?
Yeah, when we started Hilinski's Hope, as Kym was kind of telling you, and you know how these things happen. Well, there was some GoFundMe accounts that people, friends of ours, had set up, and we had a little bit of money, and we thought, okay, what we want to do with that is give that back to Washington State, let them hire the people they need to hire, and so forth. And that relationship with the staff, not the football staff, but the staff at Washington State, it just made it extremely difficult to do that. And so we thought, okay, so what else can we do? And one of the things we thought we needed to do, we were seeing guys like Kevin Love and professional athletes, more recently Olympic athletes, Formula One drivers. I mean, it's been amazing when you look, right, at what people are able to talk about and doing. But we said, those are great stories. Hayden Hurst here locally, a tight end that's now in the NFL. They have great stories. I was here. I got help. I'm better. I'm still fighting, but I'm better. Nobody's telling Tyler's story. What happens when you don't call somebody? What happens when we know that death by suicide is Tyler's case, but there's a lot of other things that sort of go along with that. And we were sort of determined, slightly because Tyler happened to be a Division I athlete, ESPN took a lot of time and attention around the story. We did this really well done. I thought they did a great job. E60 did a documentary, and other Sports Illustrated stuff. So there was a lot of attention on it. So how do you best use that attention? And that is to talk about this thing in the most difficult for most people. Kym and I, this 6 years, we can't get through a Tyler talk without choking up. You know, we've tried, and I just stopped fighting it. You know, I need to tell this story. I want you guys to hear it, and bear with me if I have to take deep breaths along the way. And the kids have been unbelievable and fantastic. So I think starting from that point, our idea was to do that. So then we met with Dr. Hainline, and we realized that rather than starting over and reinventing the wheel, Brian had, his first kind of project when he got there was to redo the mental health, 4 pillars of mental health, et cetera. And we thought, okay, terrific. So the SOPs are already there. Why doesn't everybody do this? And he said, oh, well, the old, we're a membership organization. We can't make people do stuff. Great. So game plan came into be when we said, game plan's about a 120-page facilitator guide. How do we go? Kim and I experienced this too many times. We go in, we give our Tyler talk, a lot of hugs and handshakes and a little bit of tears, and we wish them well, and a lot of thanks. I knew back then a lot of them knew of Tyler or played with Tyler. They knew the family a little bit, so there was all this, and we'd get back to the parking lot and go, that's it? We just leave them a mess like this? We can't do that. We got to. So game plan was that tool that could break down a Tyler talk, use pieces of the story, provide training to the on-staff folks at the mental health practitioners at the university, and they could use Tyler's story, and it's sort of a guide for that, right? How to have these conversations. We also provide the training through the folks at UNC Greensboro and the folks that we've been working with kind of from the beginning. So that's where game plan sort of came in, rather than try to reinvent the wheel. Let's give them extra tools or resources to process this information, so it's more than 1 + 1 = 2. Maybe we get a little bit of momentum out of that. Game plan was one of them. The modules that follow, and I know you didn't ask about those yet, but the modules that follow are born out of the same info that we got from these kids. They're so specific, especially collegiate athletes, on their sport. They're so smart, right? You've seen football playbooks are 400 pages deep, the ones that aren't electronic. You can manage. So these guys are super bright, but when they're on a topic that they don't understand, did you know there's bipolar 1, 2, and 3? For example, what people use depression and anxiety a lot. What's the difference between depression and sadness? When they get in that world that they're uncomfortable with, they don't talk as much. They just don't participate in the process or the ecosystem, right? So we said, okay, let's not dumb it down, bad choice. Let's make this so accessible to them that we want to train them sort of from the beginning. You don't get this in high school or grade school. Maybe we can provide. And so we've been doing that with the mental health support series modules, game plan, as I sort of described, and then sort of our big annual, now twice a year, student athlete mental health week, we're super proud of as well.
How do you get the engagement in that? So I love that. So essentially, I had Dr. Hanline Bryan on here a couple of weeks ago, and we obviously spoke about iteration 1. When he came in 2013, and as you know, as he just left, they had just initiated what I call iteration 2. But they're guidelines, right? They're recommendations, and then you go to the question of how do you can't enforce per se, right? Yeah. Because it's not a mandate. But do you see the adoption happening with the universities at the athletic department level?
Adoption in what sense?
They're putting resources that are real together.
I think it depends on resources that the school has, the financial resources. It seems, I'll tell you, as we go around, and we've been, NAIA, Division I, Division III, high schools, what we've seen is that if there are resources there, I'm talking financially, they do try to abide by those guidelines. But there are so many colleges and schools out there that are resource poor, right, and they just don't have the tools and the resources to do that.
Over the last 6 years, I would say we've absolutely seen and felt a resource allocation happening at this level, whether that's getting speakers, whether that's providing, resources or other opportunities for kids to talk about. I think that's only going in the right direction. Right. And it doesn't seem to be age related. This is at the big schools. Coach Saban is the most important voice on that campus. And so if he's behind it, God bless Ginger. She's fantastic. She's on your board, by the way, isn't she? Or
advisory board. Yeah.
We love her.
We love her to death. and she's got it right. You know, it's not about, it's about providing the resources, not necessarily publicizing it. So I think we've seen only improvement since we've started, and we're grateful for that for all of us, you know.
But you're providing you're for the schools that are coming into it anew, or even, you know, with an Alabama or, you know, others that have existing kind of, you know, Gold Star type programs. You're adding resources to that, right? I mean, you're an education resource that you're going in there and speaking, right? I mean, again, if it's a new program, you're almost, and that's why I guess it's called game plan. You're helping them with a game plan.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what we wanted to do with game plan, with student athlete mental health week, and with our modules, is just kind of touch every single base that we could. I actually am sort of partial to student athlete mental health week. I do love game plan and I do love the modules, but that student athlete mental health week that takes place the first week of October, it went from 17 schools. We're going to be up to 250 schools across the country. We have,
Wow.
I think, every state but two, Alaska being one of them, that have joined with us. And it's just a week. We prepare these boxes. I call them boxes of hope, and helmet decals, lapel pins for the coaches, which Coach Saban wears, hair ties, cheer ribbon, temporary tattoos, our bands. And
well, there's a digital toolkit too. So there's
yeah.
the PSA that some of the guys play at halftime. There's a concentrated effort that week to make this not just you know, something different and something we can talk about, but really meaningful on campus. And yeah, we started it, but really what's happened is we love to see what the schools do between the Saturdays, right? And Ginger and the rest of them are so good at that. And whether that's additional speakers, therapy dogs, fun and games of some sort, it's always around that topic. And it's just wonderful to see 250, 300 schools. We're a small foundation and we're taking this on. And so that part of it, we have to figure out how to deal with a little bit better, because we don't ever say no. We don't charge for guys participating, and we love to see the videos, you know, of them opening the boxes or the helmet decals. I'll tell you, the one that sticks with me, and I'll never forget it. Ryan was playing Alabama at USC,
South Carolina,
the Gamecocks, and we learned before we got to the game that at halftime they were going to, or it's really the first offensive play of the third quarter. Between kickoff and that play, there was going to be a sort of a 30-second silence, and guys were going to hold up three, you know, to remember. Tyler was number 3. Ryan is now number 3 right on the field. And so this started happening. I think it was a cheerleader and a fan that sort of started the ball rolling, and then they took off with it. And Walt, when I sort of had my head down, you know, you're just choked up, hearing nothing. And as I looked up, the first guy I see, because we're on the visitor side, parents sit on visitor side over there, and it was Coach Saban with his 3 fingers, and he had these 2, you know, the big linemen on either side of him doing. And I thought, okay, this is why we're doing this. The cameras are going to be on him. They're going to see it. Some parents going to go, what's coach holding up 3 for? And that gives them the opening, at least, to have
one story that we love. And I think it was that time, or maybe the next year, because this is our 5th year of doing it. Gentleman shared with us, I was at the game and I had my little daughter with me, and, you know, games are loud, they're rowdy, everybody's cheering. But for those 30 seconds of silence, I tell Mark all the time, it's the loudest silence you'll ever hear in a stadium, right? And the little girl said to her dad, why is everybody being quiet and holding up 3 fingers? And she's 8, right? And he said that was the impetus for me to start talking about mental health and how you take care of it with my daughter. And so it's more of a teaching moment, an awareness moment too. And in turn, I think it really beats down the stigma.
Well, I mean, that's an amazing story. I mean, I'm a former Georgia Bulldog, by the way. But
Georgia's with us too. Yeah.
No, but you know, so I can appreciate the atmosphere. that you're
Yep.
talking about, and how large that, that stage is. And
Yep.
I don't know if I shared with you, but I really got into this business in college through the advocacy of Coach Saban, through Nick, and that's how I got to Ginger. So we all need more Coach Sabans, right? Out there, the progressive minds. But you mentioned the daughter, the 8-year-old. One of the things I'm very impressed about that I didn't realize. I know a lot about you guys, but I didn't know about the Alabama high school program that you put together. I mean, that in itself, going to that level, is a major milestone. What are the goals there?
So we through Hilinski's Hope and doing these talks, we were invited down to do some down in Alabama. You might know the group. And as we spent a little bit more time there, we were introduced to a number of people, from the Speaker of the House, there in Alabama, to so many other politician advocates, guys that were sensitive to the story, and we did a little, for a couple years, we met with them very low key, show up, tell the story a little bit, explain what we're doing. And the idea was this: although we focused very heavily, obviously, on student athletes, the educational piece, you can't, at high school, you can't say, here, athletes, you get something for your mental health, the rest of you, good luck. And so we spent a good deal of time and research converting those module programs. The research is based off an age group, not necessarily athletes or not athletes. So where you would see terms like locker room and coach and the field and so forth, it's classroom and classmates and so forth. And so we made that transition, and we said, we'd love to pilot this thing in the state. Let's pick some high schools, et cetera. And so we were very fortunate last year to kick that off. And so while that's it's been a learning process on how to just get those things logistically to the schools, right, sign off on the MOAs, participate, share the story with them, I think it's been a tremendous early success. Now it's going to take time. We're waiting on data, as you can appreciate. What's the engagement level been? The early returns are thrilling. And then when you talk to the team, boy, I mean, I'll leave you with this on that. We're doing this at the high school, and we're meeting with principals and superintendents and stuff. And I can tell you, more than one time when we explain what we're doing, they listen, they nod along, and then they go, great, what do you got for 5th grade? Because my
Right.
suicidal ideation is higher in 5th or 8th grade than it is even in high school. And that, that puts a dagger in you a little bit. And so you constantly are back trying to figure out, how do we in our position, right, with small, whatever we're doing, we're trying to do for the benefit of our youth, that how do we bring that to them? And I think the state stepped up. Alabama gets picked on for a variety of things. They've got a championship attitude when it comes to taking care of their kids. And that, you can talk about Nick and the great work that he's done on and off the field there. He set the bar very, very high. And I think some of these guys have been fantastic in trying to, come through on that for the youth, certainly for the public high schools in Alabama anyway. So it's one of those programs. It took a while to get going. It'll take a little while to publish or get the results back to them and encourage everybody to participate. But we're super grateful, and we love Alabama.
Well, well, I think it's a great model. I do hear, even in my world, I do hear quite a bit about, this is what we're doing is needed down at that lower level, right? Start it, get it when it's just festering. They're having a lot of doubts. We all know the social media, online issues that drive all this, and then college, obviously, NIL, transfer portal, it's just going out of another level. But you have, so you really speak to something that fundamentally has to happen. And we all know this is just part of life. It's, economics, right? So when you get into economic realities, especially when you're trying to catch it at the, well, we know it at the college level, but whether it's the high school level or it's the, junior high, coming out of elementary school, how do you, you're talking about educational resources, essentially, right? I mean, we're talking about educational resources. Where do those educational resources come from? And essentially, who's picking up the bill for that? And so if it's not at the school level because there's constraints, is it at the district level? Is it at the state level, right? And hopefully there's some advocacy that's happening around the country, and perhaps, doing proof of values at Alabama will resonate in other places. So, well, the one thing I guess I haven't brought up is that, and I, we got to go into the world that we all know is state of college athletics, because the economics, speaking again of economics, have gotten just so vast, right? I mean, it's just, it's almost mind-boggling for me as a former, D1 athlete, to where it is, and I have a lot of friends in that world, and now I'm kind of living it, daily, weekly.
Yeah.
But you have another element of this business. Athletic directors get paid to win. Coaches get paid to win. Trainers get paid to put the kids back out into competition so they have a better chance of winning. The smart ADs, sports med guys understand that from a fundamental business perspective, getting everybody's mind healthy is a way to get them back in competition and win. So you combine the intelligence that it seems to me, and I'd love to hear your perspective. It seems like because of the awareness, because of people like Nick, that people have such great respect for, that they're understanding that you need that balance. You can't separate the mind from the body. So that education, that awareness, and that safety for kids to come forward and know there's resources for help, that also lends to your program of making sure nobody falls through the cracks, and there's proactive care for education, because it's combined, right? You've got trying to try to mitigate the risk of a tragedy, as well as the business side of this, that as soon as you take care of the mind, they're going to be out there performing at a better level.
Yeah, that's what we hear all the time, actually, from Dr. Michael Gervais. You may know him. He just said, if you are taking care of your athlete's mind, it's just all connected. They're going to be happier and better players on the field and off the field. And so it's just mind, body, and soul connected. But we hear that over and over again. And we also hear from championship coaches that realize that. We were in Oklahoma. Coach Gasso, we were just talking with coaches. She's a softball coach, right? They just won their 4th championship. And she said to us during this lunch meeting, she stands up, raises her hand, and she says, I've got to do more. I need to do more for my athletes, for my softball players. So to have a high caliber coach like that, and the AD was right behind her, just saying, yep, we're supporting the mental health of our student athletes. It's there, it's out there. It's just that not every university is doing it. And I think it's because they're overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at some point in time, and again, this probably goes to the business, we're on the tech side of this and trying to improve the care levels with intelligence, data turning into intelligence. But, you've got to imagine at some point in time, they're really not going to have a choice, right? If you start breaking this down by conference, and 2 or 3 schools in the conference are doing it, and they're having their winning ways, and it's a recruiting tool. It's a recruiting tool, right? And then those 2 or 3 schools in a conference move up to 5 schools, and it moves up to 8 schools. There has to come a point in time. I interviewed Pat Hobbs, who's a very progressive AD from Rutgers, recently. And I said, look, they're in the Big Ten. And I said, with the budget cuts that just came from this settlement, and the fact that the universities now have to allocate, what is it, $20 million? In a deficit that they had before. Our mental health budget's going to be cut. Now he's speaking at his level, right?
Yeah.
He's speaking at Big Ten.
Yeah.
His answer was, not only can't you cannot cut them, you actually have to spend more money on it. And I don't see how you can afford it. It's got to be one of those line items that you can't cut. So let me, let's go to the word that I get used, and it kind of goes to the future part of this conversation, proactivity, right? So that's part of what we do. We believe this is a reactive world by and large, right? It's acute management. Dr. Katie O'Neill, who's the CMO from the SEC, when I asked her, I said, why is there a crisis? We all know every time you ask that, why is there a crisis in college athletics? Social media, NIL, transfer portal. Now there's professional. Dr. Hanline brought it up, which I didn't even know. Professional gambling now, and the gamblers, shaming these kids for missing a shot or dropping a ball or whatever it is. I mean, it's become organized bullying, right? So kind of unimaginable. And what Dr. O'Neill said was, okay, those are all the reasons for the crisis. What's the solution, right? And she gave the example, which you guys would appreciate. She said, this is akin to 30 years ago, the busiest people in the medical profession were the cardiologists, acute management, smoking, nothing on labels for, calorie content and sodium content. So I don't know if she didn't know if it was driven by the insurance business, but the proactivity was nutritional programs, the fitness programs, and it was getting ahead of it to mitigate the risk, right? And she said, we're right now where they were 30 years ago, and we need proactivity. So kind of goes to the next question. In the next 5 years, crystal ball, what do you think is going to happen in this realm?
Well, I can tell you what I'd like to see happen. Whether it's likely to or not, I suppose we'll see. But if you take where we've come, as a group of people from the last 5 years, anyway, 5 or 6 years, and I was on a different podcast that I heard the bumper music and I heard the guy talking, and he said, I'm talking to Mark Hilinski, and you're going to love it because he doesn't just go around talking about stigma reduction and awareness. Like somehow that was not worthy, and it was a great opportunity to step in and go, listen, I still meet with coaches, parents, players that aren't quite sure there's any science behind mental health, right? I mean, or mental illness, that there are still plenty of people that, you should be able to fix that. It's something you should do. Unless you have a tumor, unless you can point to something that caused this, you got here, you should be able to get out of it. Far fewer than it used to be, but certainly there are still some. So I think you're going to I hope that we continue to see an effort on the awareness and stigma reduction side. To us, it's become more clear over the last few years. You have to start sooner. We teach you, you get PE every day, you get health classes, maybe not every day, but it's part of your curriculum. The subject on mental health, let's just stay with high school, it's not there yet. We're not talking about it in a way that's educating them to understand what they might be going through, how to process some of that, but also how to be a good teammate, a good classmate, a good friend, how to recognize. And so maybe you laugh at it, but one of the suggestions, and we don't give many to the kids, is listen, I know this comes out, everybody says it, but you got to be kind around this conversation. You don't want to be the person that said something derogatory that somebody else on your team has heard and makes them fearful of, worried about, concerned about asking for help on something that could be fatal. Not always, every mental illness doesn't lead to, obviously, to suicide or to a fatality, but dealing and living with undiagnosed depression or anxiety, I've never had it that I know of, but the stories we hear, it's incredibly difficult to process. So we're going to have kids. I'd love to see in 5 years. I'd love to get us be part of that process in 5 years. That is part of the organized education of our youth around this topic. If we can do that in some degree, I think the awareness piece of it will expand dramatically. I think the stigma around it, if you're talking about these things in class with your friends, you don't have to do it 24/7, but when it's up there, you sort of have a little bit of a background and you understand the vocabulary around it. So you might feel more empowered to talk about it.
And I love the word you used earlier, recruiting tool, right? So all our boys went through the recruiting process, right? And visited to so many universities, and they were so excited to show them their new stadium or their new locker room. That was a recruiting tool, right? I would love it if the recruits, as they're coming and the parents are there, that mental health professional, those offices that are right there next to the athletic trainers' offices, they use that as a tool. That's why I want my son to go to the University of Georgia, because they've got an amazing mental health staff.
Right.
So I'd love to see that.
From a recruiting, it'd be awesome. At a recruiting level, you're dealing with, in some cases, life-changing amounts of money and opportunities. And yeah, I'd love to see it too. I don't know. We haven't met as many parents that would be swayed by that recruiting pitch as we had hoped. Right. So I think that starts at the education side, but from a recruiting standpoint, hey, if we're championship caliber sports or athletic teams, and we can take care of our student athletes' mental health, that should rank up there as high as about anything. I don't know that it will, but it should absolutely be a standard that everybody, tries to attain for sure.
Well, there's, there's a lot of, in that ecosystem, both at the high school level and the collegiate level, you have these different personas that are great influencers on that student at the high school level, or student athlete, and the student athletes at the collegiate level. I mean, going to the high school level, I mean, you have to have the administration who believes in this, right?
Yeah.
I think again, for the student athlete, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and then you get into the college years, how are we educating the coaches? So when you look at the stigma and somebody being shy, you've got teammates, but let's be honest, it's the coaches. Am I going to get demoted? Am I going to be looked at as I'm not tough enough, right? That I've got a flaw and it's not something you can see. It's not a broken collarbone, right? Yeah. So that has to be part of this program, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm dealing with a college right now that very progressive AD, really great resources. One of the concerns still is some of the old school coaches, in terms of the athletes feeling, for lack of a better term, safe to come forward like they would with their knee or their shoulder, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the day when 9th grade, 10th graders, college kids, 20s come together? How you doing? I haven't seen you for a month. Well, I had a little meniscus, surgery, and I think I'm going to be running here in the next couple of weeks, so I'm pretty good. How you been doing? Well, I went through a little bit of a depression journey, but found somebody that really helped. I'm on good medicine, and I'm feeling great, and I'm back, competing. Boom, move on, right?
Yeah.
Move on. Start talking about your favorite, NFL team, right?
Right.
And wouldn't that be a beautiful, because if that happens, the stigma has really, in essence, gone away.
When we talk to the kids, many times there's coaches in there as well. We invite them always. We'll do separate talks to them to explain what we're saying to their players and stuff. I think at the very beginning, there was some consternation around, what are they going to say? Are they going to jump up and go, listen, if you even wake up on the wrong side of the bed, take a week off, you don't have to run hard, whatever, that somehow we would be adversarial to the process. But when you learn how to advocate, you don't have to be against anything. Well, I'm here. We're here to try to put the Tylers of the world at the top of the line to get the help or to ask for the help they need. You need a lot of things for that to happen. You have to have the resources. You have to have coaches that are willing not to penalize you. And you have to have athletes that will actually ask for help, and those on the team that will support you. that's the important, to me, that's the important part. The negativity that exists, or the lack of, I would say it's a lack of education or understanding, tends to go away when they're exposed to more information. Sadly, sometimes that has to come right out of their own family, and they have to be that close to the journey. I mean, you've probably heard variations that we've heard kids tell us they'd rather be known to have a drug problem than a mental health condition, because they can fix that, or it seemingly fix. But the reality is, you said it beautifully, talking about it, meniscus repair, a depression episode, or the like, that you're talking about those two things equally. And so if you need 6 months off to treat, to find the right diagnosis, to get the right medication, we tell the kids that's part of your journey too, right? You've got to go through that process. You can't shortcut an ACL reconstruct. You can't come back in 6 weeks. Right. It's not, you're not tough enough to come back in 6 weeks is BS. You need to go through the process. So a better understanding on both sides, right? Why are you being picked on? Well, I had to miss 3 months of school because I was in an in-treatment facility. I feel so much better, but that's the reality of what the coaches have to deal without you there. They don't necessarily have to hold your spot for an injury on the field, nor do they have to. And we want to elevate the conversation that, these are more important than that. Try talking to a 20-year-old about playing time, and they simply don't want to hear it. That's the most important thing to them. So at the end of the day, for us, if the kids in the room, if the coaches and the AD staffs, by the way, have been largely the leaders in this, in my mind. Few of the coaches, but the athletic director staff, we have some really, you've mentioned a couple, and we have some spectacular guys that really do understand this. And what do they want? They want their kids to have a successful time. They want them to become great contributing alum. They want,
Exactly.
success in all those ways.
Exactly.
And you have to start somewhere on the mental health journey. And I think that's in the education space. So I'm sorry, we talk about this stuff all the time. It's super important and personal to us, as you can tell.
Yeah. I mean, look, we're in a world here where somebody goes to have knee surgery or gets hospitalized for a physical situation, people get flowers and cards.
Right.
And, the same you used, whether it's inpatient or, outpatient, but they're not in school and they're not participating. It's mum's the word, right? So that has to change, right? I mean, you got to be very heartened. You mentioned up front about, the exposure moving up to elite athletes, and, I assume you probably collaborate, when you have, and I'm a Philadelphia guy, so I'll use Lane Johnson. I don't know if you know Lane.
Sure.
Lane out there being a great public spokesperson about his depression episodes. That's got to have an impact on these young athletes, right? Yep. I mean, really, from the standpoint, is it okay? Is it safe? They have to, I mean, that sense of leadership, and I assume that's part of who you collaborate, because that's a powerful platform.
Oh, it certainly is. I was thinking back to Dak Prescott, when he was just beaten up by one of the talking heads, over at Fox or ESPN, about him. He can't be the leader of the Cowboys and be, crying about his brother dying by suicide. And you see stuff like that, and you say, on top of how difficult it is for Dak to talk about that, now he has to deal with somebody that's going to very publicly sort of, create at least a conversation. He had as many supporters as detractors, and that story, but it's super important. And I think the follow on to that, I don't think those guys, frankly, get enough credit, because a lot of then what follows is, well, they have access to resources that we don't have. They can take days off. Listen, we've met too many of them that money and finances isn't an issue for them, and their families are blown apart by this struggle alone. They can't fix it with cash. Right. They have to be able to understand each other, go through the hard work, have those long talks. we tell them all the time, we don't say committed suicide for this group because you don't commit cancer, you don't commit ALS. It's not your fault.
Right.
A lot of times there's that burden that comes along with it, right?
Yeah,
Is
that's a good
somehow I
point.
created this.
Yes, that's a very good point. They take it personal to their own parenting or guidance
Yeah.
or lack thereof. I have a question that I always ask as a wrap up that it has a lot of interesting answers from from Nick Saban to athletes. Who in your life journey has been most inspirational? If you want to tackle that, individually or together.
Hmm. Well, I would say Tyler, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he's our why. He's why we started Hilinski's Hope, that and it's hard actually to say one person. I mean, I would say our student athletes, our youth, right? They inspire us to keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep breathing when all we really want to do sometimes, Walt, is run away,
Right. Right.
How do you live without your son?
Right.
And anybody losing a child, it is just devastating. Every day I have to remind myself that Tyler is not coming back. But these student athletes are the reason why we're staying here and we're working hard. So I think it's Tyler, it's our youth, it's our student athletes. They inspire us to continue to try to put good into this world and just help support their mental health. Maybe Mark has another answer, but it's Tyler and our kids.
Well, I was, yeah, and I don't disagree. I think the thing that comes to mind right away is Kym.
Yeah.
In your family, this is, it well, I'm sure, maybe it hasn't touched you necessarily personally, but we know what you do. To see, you don't see a lot of couples that do this together, right? And I don't know if that's an advantage, disadvantage for anybody else, but I've been to enough Tyler talks and given my half of them that there's certain things that kids will listen to from the mom of somebody, the dad of somebody, the uncle, and so forth. So I'm inspired by her, but also I've got two boys that are trying to figure this out. And we hold it together, and we do this a lot. It's 7 days a week. You can't get away from it, nor do you want to. And they need help too, right? When we close this little episode up, we go right back to the reality that Tyler's not coming back, and that Ryan's struggling a little bit here, and that Kelly has fought so hard to get, to a place that he's comfortable, and to not give up, even when you get beaten down. And so sometimes you don't have to look that far. There's plenty of public personas I could list for you, but having kind of been doing this for 6 years now, I couldn't be more proud to be with them.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I have this shirt, I'll tell you really quick. I always made shirts for the kids when they were little, nicknames, whatever they were going through that year. It was just something fun that they wear. One year I made a shirt for me, and it's my favorite t-shirt. And it is the truth. And everybody who's a parent will understand this. Mine said, "I'm in love with 4 men. My Mark, my Kelly, my Tyler, and my Ryan." And you're right, Mark. They are my inspiration. They're the reason why I keep going. One of the men that I was in love with is no longer here physically, but we can feel him every single day. We feel him in the work that we're doing. And I know we'll see him again someday. It's just getting through day after day is hard. And somehow the work that we're doing with Hilinski's Hope helps us too.
What the two of you have done is, the word remarkable should be limited in its usage. But you're doing something and have been doing something that's remarkable. You use the word inspirational. It is inspirational to me personally. I've gone through a pretty difficult journey, and I have family members, and I've been exposed to more since I've been doing this. But I just have great admiration. So thank you for joining today, and thank you so much for sharing. I want to also say I was fortunate to go on your United podcast with
Yeah.
Dr. Nicholson, and I
Yeah.
enjoyed that. She's a special person, and
She's great.
you know,
Nice.
I came back from some travels, Kim, and I had a big box out there, and I just couldn't believe all the great, you know, swag that I now have, you know.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful, and I appreciate your note as well.
Your episode was great, by the way. I loved listening to it. So thank you for being on it. Yeah.
Well, that in itself, I mean, for again, our audience, they have a podcast program called United, and you've done what, 300, to a couple hundred,
300
Yeah.
episodes. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
We're looking at the fall to revamp it a little bit and bring more of the athlete to athlete conversation. So we're going to mix up the hosting. We got a big announcement coming on that, and you know, towards the end of the year or towards the end of the summer, and a bunch of other things. You know, you don't know where you find the time. It's hard enough, Walt, to do the actual work, but then to fundraise and to
time,
travel, you know how it is.
Time.
So I'm inspired. I have to say, so yes, this is the beginning. You know, the thing I wanted out of all this when we heard your podcast on United was just to visit with you. And you know, we got back on the road, and I'm so, you know, interested and amazed by the journey that I've read about. It would mean a lot to me to hear more of that directly from you and get some guidance on some things that you've probably tackled well in your own journey. So thank you for having us. We're delighted to be here. You have some amazing folks on the show. You do such a nice job. And this is bringing awareness, right? This is talking about this. Even the three of us is changing the way people think about the stigma associated with mental illness. So we're grateful to be on it, and thank you so much for having us.
You've impacted so many lives, and I said this when I first met you, and including myself. I've been, from the time I got exposed, I've just been, again, remarkable. So thank you again. I want to say thank you as well to our listening audience or that follow us. We are doing our best to emulate in a small way what Kim and Mark have done in a much larger stage to bring in some thought leaders to eliminate this stigma for the purpose of people getting healthy sooner and back into whatever their endeavors are. This is Walt Norley, and thank you for joining Athletes on Balance. Be well.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Athletes on Balance. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please follow us on your preferred podcast app to catch our next episode. Join our community by sharing with an athlete, mental health care provider, or coach in your circle.